You're listening to How We Got Here. I'm your co-host, Christopher McClellan, and I'm joined by the most wonderful co-host in the entire world, Christina Best.
You know, Chris, I just feel like every time you introduce me, you just level up and just continue to inflate my ego further and further. At this point, I'm just convinced that I am the best co-host that has ever existed. So thank you.
Of course. Who else would I want to work with on this? And, it's been a couple of months. We took a break right before the holidays and we're dusting off the microphone and earphones. And here we are. It's like riding a bicycle.
It really is. I must admit, I was a little rusty, more rusty than I thought I would be, trying to get logged in today and figuring out the mic situation. But we're here now, and as long as I sound good, I think that's all that matters.
Christina, rusty. I mean, rusty is like somebody that, like myself, who's turning 65. I'm 65. I'm on Medicare now, so it's all good.
Listen, rusty can happen to anyone at any age. Okay, let's not discriminate.
Yeah, and we have such a fabulous guest lined up today, and I'm so excited to talk with her because some of our backgrounds are similar as it relates to cancer and caregiving. But would you do the honors of introducing our guest?
I would love to. Yes, I'm very excited to hear more about her story. She's someone I've been wanting to talk to for a very long time. So we are talking, of course, about Dr. Fumiko Chino. She's a cancer researcher and assistant attending in Radiation Oncology Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. She is also a director at the Costs of Care Group, which is a global NGO focused on affordability in healthcare. She has spoken across the U.S. and internationally on the costs of cancer care. And she was a caregiver for her husband, Dr. Andrew Mark Ladd, who died from cancer in March of 2007. So welcome, Fumiko. Yay.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to have a conversation today focused on caregiving.
This is it will be an exciting and a fun conversation about a serious topic. But Dr. Chino, as we do with all of our guests, we have to know, how did you get here?
Really a series of catastrophes mixed in with, honestly, a very privileged life. So I feel like I've had kind of equal parts luck and, sadness, I guess. I feel very blessed with having had an amazing upbringing. I'm the youngest of 7 kids. My mom is a physician. And so I think, she really set the stage for the fact that I could really do anything when I was growing up. I did not think I was going to be a physician. So it was open to me, but I closed that door. I went to school for art. I was very sort of surrounded in the art world for many years. And unfortunately, kind of medicine dragged me into it. So even though I grew up in a medical background because my mom, I had never planned on living any kind of medical life until my fiance and then husband was diagnosed with cancer. And we were sort of, forced to assume these kind of traditional roles of patient and caregiver, while I think frantically struggling to also be a young couple in love and, young, motivated people starting their careers and trying to wear essentially many hats. But when my husband was diagnosed with cancer, I think, it sort of just consumed everything that we had planned to be, everything that we were maybe meant to be, and the ultimate catastrophe of diagnosis, treatment, and his death really kind of just forced me to reevaluate what I was meant to do. My art career, my art background, really, other than I think giving me great hobbies and maybe a framework for doing the medical work I do now, didn't really have a bearing on my career, I guess. So I had to kind of reconsider my life as a cancer widow. Ultimately, I ended up going to medical school because I was really interested in taking something out of horrible tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
I never planned on being a cancer doctor, though. So again, a series of events has led me to essentially realize that my place in the world now is to use the experience that I had as a cancer caregiver to inform research that hopefully can improve how cancer care is delivered, how patients are supported, and also how families are supported with a serious diagnosis. And that was probably the most long-winded answer I've ever given to a simple question. But I think the shorter answer would be, how did I get here kicking and screaming?
So I was going to ask, I guess, first, when was Mark diagnosed? And then can you talk to us a little bit more about pre-cancer life, particularly as a younger couple, and then post-cancer diagnosis and how that changes the way that you see life in your future? You're speaking to all those plans that you had.
Sure. So my husband, his name is Andrew Mark Ladd.
I'm sorry about that.
No, it's fine. I was just like, who's Mark?
I really thought I had it.
No, you're good. So he was diagnosed in the early 2000s. So all of this kind of story happened pre-Obamacare, which is important because it's relevant to sort of what happened in terms of our costs. So our cancer care was so expensive. And one of the reasons was because it was kind of pre-ACA. But he was diagnosed in 2005 and ultimately died in 2007. And, our life before cancer was really, it's funny, like, I feel like we were one of the first couples to meet online. So we met on a dating website. We, were very different personalities. So I was very much based in the arts world, like, creative, and he's a computer scientist that thinks very creatively about things. So we would be either at, we would, go to modern art shows, or we would go to experimental music, and we're kids. We were kids. We were kids in love. We were in our 20s, and it was fun. He was a big bridge player. He really liked playing bridge because it was like computer scientists and like octogenarians are who likes playing bridge. And so he was always trying to teach me how to play bridge, which I steadfastly refused. We had just a lot of fun together. We would, we had a group of friends that I always said, it was like, we had the geek squad and the goon squad. And so we had like the geeks, the computer science, and then the goons were like like the rabble rousers, like to go out and party on the weekends. And we tried to sort of bring them together. The one thing that unites geeks and goons is poker, apparently. But, when he was diagnosed with cancer, I think everyone kind of knows this with serious illness. It's not like necessarily like, it's not like a car accident where like there's a clear before and after. There's like this transition period where you don't even realize that things are changing. These small things happen, you start having symptoms, you ignore them. The symptoms get a little worse, you ignore them. Maybe you realize, I have lost a lot of weight. So I think by the time he was diagnosed, he had lost like 35 pounds. By the time that doctors realized he was being serious, that was sort of one of the triggers, was that he was quite frankly, a computer scientist that lived a lot on Burger King. So, he was a little overweight before, but then he got very, very skinny fairly rapidly. And then kind of once we actually had a cancer diagnosis, our lives were very much just dominated by doctor's appointments and, trying to figure out how to negotiate, how to have that balance of still trying to move forward with your life, but realizing that you don't know what there is, you're trying to make it there, but you don't know what that thing is. You don't know what the ultimate destination could be. You hope it's happily a forever after. But I think we both realized that his diagnosis was very, very serious. I think he, quite frankly, is smarter than me. And so he probably knew, and also it was happening to his body. I think he knew more than I did in terms of how it might be limited. I think towards the end of his diagnosis, we both realized that, but I think he knew earlier than I did, that he wasn't going to come out on the other side.
A cancer diagnosis, and I'm share just a bit about my story so you understand where I'm coming from, is my now deceased partner was diagnosed with esophageal cancer in 2011. And what so many similarities and experiences, but what I'd be interested in asking you is the realization when that diagnosis came in, and I remember it like it was yesterday when we were sitting with the doctor. It's like that diagnosis impacts more than just one person, and how to frame that and how to find the comfort and relief in that diagnosis. Because one of the things that we used to say back and forth, when we might have cancer, but cancer doesn't have us. That was our motto throughout the entire process. And I'd be just real interested to know how the two of you personally interacted after that diagnosis.
Yeah, the one thing that really sticks with me, something his oncologist said, because I think, when he was diagnosed, we realized that this is something that could limit his lifespan. And we were trying to figure out how to plan, how to make, how to move forward as a couple, in our careers, with our lives, honestly, with our finances at some point. And his oncologist said, well, it's sort of get busy living or get busy dying. And the plan is for you to not get busy dying. So you have to continue living your life. Mm-hmm. And it's really something I try to emphasize to my patients now as a cancer doctor, is that, cancer doesn't define who you are.
Right.
It doesn't define, your interactions with the world. It's selfish. It takes a lot of your time. And it creates burdens, but it's not, you are not a cancer patient. You are still you. You're just dealing with cancer. Mm-hmm. And, many people sort of understand like that they can be consumed with a cancer diagnosis. And whenever I, see people in clinic now, and I talk to them, I talk to their partners, I'm always like, this is a team sport.
Yes.
This is, we need all hands on deck, to move forward, to get the very best outcome. And so I am uniquely aware, that, it's the whole family that's involved in terms of supporting someone through the process of a cancer diagnosis and cancer treatment, and sometimes end of life care. And so, when I was talking to it with my husband, it was really just, we were united as a team. We were in it together. I was with him for every single appointment, every chemotherapy infusion, every hospitalization, every day, so it was, we were in it together. I always say, like, my husband's a very bad driver, so I would never let him drive himself. He was even worse with cancer, but his baseline was very bad.
I get that 100% on that one. Yes.
Yeah. So I was his driver. I was his pharmacist. I was his financial assistant. I was his nurse. I did his personal care at some point, and it was just all consuming. We did enlist help from his family, from my family. It was not just myself. I don't want to take all the credit. But yeah, it's exhausting. I always say that the caregiver PTSD, for lack of a better term, is real, and it creates real burdens on your body. So I have permanent injury to my body from having slept in hospital chairs for, weeks at a time. At one point I was even walking with a limp because I had tweaked something, and, no one has ever, I'm not 20 anymore. And it's funny. It's like I have these lasting mental scars. I have lasting financial scars, and I have these lasting physical scars from caregiving. So, and I'm just a caregiver, for patients who are able to get through a cancer diagnosis and treatment. They have all of those things in spades from their cancer. So I feel lucky on the other side of it to have emerged with what I have. At least I have a mission, right? And a career that's weirdly partially built on the fact that as a team, I was really depending on him to change the world because he was so smart. And when he died, it's one of the reasons why I realized I had to do more than just sell DVDs for a living. I was an art director of an entertainment company. It sounds cool, but really you're selling people things. And so I realized I had to do something larger than, my initial plans, just because, again, we were a team. And if he wasn't going to have the capacity, the ability to fulfill his potential, I had to step up my game.
Wow. What a beautiful way to honor him while he was living and after the fact. And I can certainly relate to that journey of, your life going in one direction, and then you are either a primary caregiver or supporting a caregiver. Based on my experience, it was my dad. So my mom was his primary caregiver. But having gone through that experience, I couldn't imagine not trying to do the proverbial changing the world based on that experience, just seeing how hard it was for her. And it sounds like for you too, it was pretty all consuming, and you wore many, many hats. I'm curious, you did say you got support from friends and family, but I'm curious how much thought you ever gave to respite or taking care of yourself. Was that ever something that you were actively thinking about, or were you so consumed in the role that you weren't really giving that any consideration?
No, at one point I was getting, it's weird. I guess the word I know now, like the word burnout from medicine, but at the time wasn't really aware of it. But I was getting burned out from caregiving after his third hospitalization, and my family and his family kind of, and Andrew said this too. He was like, "You need to take a break. Please go visit your friend." I went to, interestingly enough, New York. I traveled from Houston, which is where we were, to New York. I'm sorry, we were in Ann Arbor at that time, to New York to visit. One of my best friends lives here. And so I was here for a couple of days. But yeah, it was literally just so I could be someplace else other than at the bedside, do something else than give him his medication and count calories, think about anything else other than our, potential future or in bills that came in. So, and that was really lovely. I feel like everyone should have that opportunity to just take a little bit of a break. When I was in the hospital for the last time we were in the hospital together, before he died, they sent me home one day. I took a shower. I slept in my own bed, that sort of thing. And I still remember it because when I went back to the hospital, like he had like a decline. And I was just like, it's magical thinking, right? Like, oh, it's because I wasn't there that this happened.
Yeah.
And I know that now it's not. But
it takes a while to convince yourself of that, because the only night that I didn't stay with Richard he said to me in the hospital, "You need to go home and get some rest. I'll be okay." Well, the next day, that was the last conversation he and I had, because the transition had already started. And when you're in the middle of it, you see it from one set of lenses. And then all of a sudden it happens and you recognize it. Oh my goodness. our caregiving capes are so limited?
I would say it's magical thinking, and maybe you didn't realize how bad it was until you kind of come back with fresh eyes. But in my mind, I wish I had that much power, that somehow this was my fault, because then I could have done something differently that would have caused different results.
Yeah.
But of course, it's not in my power. It's not in individuals' power. It's not in, the patient's power, and maybe it is also just when the person that you're bonded to, that you're a member of a team with, when you're there, you're supporting them, they're supporting you. It's a two-way street. But maybe when you do take a respite, it allows them to relax too. And maybe that's what can further a transition. And I don't know. I'm not an end-of-life care expert, although I do some research in it. I think that we don't quite recognize, maybe as caregivers, how much burden we're putting on our loved ones to perform for us.
Very well said. Very well said.
I was just going to say the same thing. So let's talk a little bit more about financial toxicity, the theme of really a lot of what you've spoken about, of course, professionally. So how much thought had you given to financial planning and stuff like that prior to the cancer diagnosis? I mean, I would imagine being in your 20s, maybe it's not of the utmost priority. And then as you're going through that experience as a caregiver, where is like the inflection point with all the financial issues? At what point does it become overwhelming?
I had given zero thought to our financial future. I, as a young person, in my first, I put in quotes, real job, I was just excited to have something like a 401k and to put in like whatever 6% of my salary into that. I thought, I'm adulting so hard right now because I have a 401k. And we really hadn't considered it. My husband was a PhD student, and so he got paid as a PhD student, but we knew that his ultimate career would be either in academia or at Google. He would be well paid for his work as a computer scientist. And so it's not like I didn't worry about the future in terms of our finances, but I felt like fairly confident between my job and his job that we would be okay. We weren't going to go yachting for the weekend, but we would have some financial stability. When he was diagnosed, everything actually seemed okay at first. His health insurance actually seemed fine. It was paying for everything as it was supposed to. We had co-pays, we had co-insurance, that sort of thing, but it was all sort of manageable. And then the first hitch that we kind of ran up against was that his pharmacy benefit had a yearly cap. And again, it's something that's not allowed now under the ACA, but the cap was $5,000, which means that that's how much they would pay per year on any outpatient medications. And at the time, Zofran was $30 a pill. It's generic now, but at the time on Dancitron, Zofran was about $800 a prescription. And so, you can do the math just in Zofran. We met that cap pretty quickly. So the first thing we started having to do was paying out of pocket for medications. And then a couple of months later, maybe even 6-8 months later, that's when we realized that actually his health insurance had a cap too, and it had a lifetime cap. So not a yearly cap, but a lifetime cap, meaning that after a certain dollar amount, his health insurance was effectively done. So it's like, I'm taking my marbles, I'm leaving the sandbox, I'm done. And again, this is not allowed under the Affordable Care Act. Thanks, Obama. But sorry. But his health insurance stopped paying for his cancer care. And if I recall, the max was $300,000, $500,000 seems like a lot of money. But if you have any serious or critical illness, you understand that if you had a car accident, you can max that out. If you had a stroke, you can max that out. If you had a bad infection, you can max that out. If you need rehab, you can max that out. So it really, until we met up against those things, the pharmacy and the max, like I had no idea that we were treading in very, very dangerous waters. Like, you know, there were piranhas like inches below our feet, but we didn't quite know it. And so it wasn't like a drip, drip, drip sort of thing. It was much more like, and I'm done. And that's all of the responsibilities of his medical care were all on us. That hit us quite harshly when we realized that. And that's when I think my husband made the realization that he better find another job that he could get health insurance for. Either that or that we would have to basically move to another country with nationalized health care, because otherwise he wasn't really going to be able to continue with his cancer treatment. So that was a very harsh reality. You know, I'm privileged in that I come from a family. My mom is a doctor. You know, some of my siblings are doctors. You know, they could lend us money. His parents, his father is an accountant, so they could lend us money. They could pay for some things out of pocket. But even with all of that additional assistance, you know, there's not a line item budget in anyone's like, you know, household thing that's like, you know, $200,000, $300,000, et cetera. So it became
nobody plans for an emergency.
Yes. And if we did, there's definitely something wrong with us.
There's definitely something.
And we all have a rainy day fund, right? You know, when I got to the point in which I had $10,000 in my bank account that I could actually use, you know, in case I needed it, I felt like so sophisticated. But yeah, nobody has the, you know, $500,000 in case of catastrophic calamity. And so, it got real hard real quick. And for him, I think he really did realize that when he was, for example, interviewing for positions, that he was like interviewing to save his life. He was interviewing for health insurance. And I feel like his innate intelligence, the hard work that he put into his career, the fact that he still has a higher H index than I do, all meant that he could get a good job. And I realized that people outside of academia may not know what an H index is.
Yeah, I was like nodding along. Yeah, sure. H index. Got it.
It's a measure of how influential your academic work is.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
You know, this concept of financial toxicity, I find that so timely to talk about because, you know, we're kind of on, while we've had similar experiences, we're on opposite ends of the lifespan. I never had to worry about Richard's cost of his care. I never saw one bill. And that was the benefit of him being on Medicare.
Yeah, it's shocking, actually. You know, I know now from research that people who have private health insurance really do suffer far more from financial toxicity than for people on government insurance like Medicare and Medicaid. And your classic logic is that Medicare, Medicaid, government insurance is bad. But in terms of financial toxicity, is actually quite good. There are people who have Medicaid who already had financial hardship, and that's how they qualify for Medicaid. And obviously they can still significantly struggle because even a $2 copay can be unaffordable.
Right.
But yeah, you know, Medicare is actually quite good health insurance.
Well, I'm looking forward to experiencing it. But as I read your story and the financial toxicity of the medical bills, and then on top of the cost of caregiving, both physically, emotionally, spiritually, and financially, it does take its toll.
Yeah, I think that, it's funny, Andrew was diagnosed and treated over a decade ago, and things have changed a lot in healthcare and in terms of insurance and copays, coinsurance, and premiums. And so we had sort of one step forward, two steps back. So one step forward for people with serious health conditions was the Affordable Care Act, because it really did help coverage. But two steps back in that everything has actually just gotten more expensive. So everything continues to rise. And so premiums have risen, copays have risen, deductibles have risen. And so even though we've made some gains, financial toxicity is actually, I think, even more common now than it's been in the past, in terms of the real harsh decisions that a lot of families have to make in terms of what can we pay for? What do we sacrifice? What does the future look like for us? What's worth it? And I've certainly had patients tell me, I decided to not pursue that because of X, Y, or Z. I've had people tell me they didn't go on clinical trials because that they couldn't afford the extra trips. And, my own research will show that even small things like parking can really add up to be a huge barrier for patients getting the best care. And, it seems silly to think that, just getting to the appointment is the biggest barrier, but it really is, and for me personally, I know that, again, a caregiver can be taken out of the workforce because now you don't have even the salary of the person who's sick, but you don't have the salary of the person who's caregiving either. So it's not just a hole that you're throwing money into, it's a hole that actually keeps getting deeper because you don't have the income coming in. And so, it's a bottomless pit.
It's a good way of describing it.
Yeah.
Well, tell us more about the research that you've done since becoming a physician, and its practical applications, what you've learned, and would love to also hear your thoughts on how we fix this.
Yeah, sometimes I always try to emphasize for people that there are many things that kind of contribute to financial toxicity, in terms of how insurance is structured, how payments are delivered to physicians, how much medicine costs, how it's delivered. And, it's a very complex system, healthcare in the United States. More than half of Americans don't even don't understand their health insurance. So it's incredibly complex. So for many people, they're like, well, this is such a big problem, I don't even know where to start. And I was just like, you can literally start anywhere.
Right.
Yeah. There's no wrong starting place.
Honestly, the easiest place to start is actually just to make conversations about costs more open. I feel like that itself could have made a huge difference for us because we never talked about the incredible high costs related to his cancer care, about our fears of his care being just stopped, like kicked out onto the street. We had huge fears of that. We were also ashamed of the fact that we couldn't afford the healthcare. We thought it was like our fault. And just saying like, hey, normalizing the fact that sometimes care is unaffordable, that, we all have to make difficult decisions, and we want the best care for you, and we want the best care to be delivered, because this idealized plan that we sometimes make for patients, which can never, the practical things, that stop it from being delivered, the physician just knows the idealized plan. And then for whatever reason, they're like, well, it didn't happen because they were quote unquote non-compliant. But if you don't dig any deeper and find out what actually happened to derail your perfect plan, then you'll never be able to actually get the patient any kind of good care. And so I really do feel like the first step is always just talking about these things, normalizing the fact that it's okay if you say, hey, I can't afford that. Or, hey, when you schedule the lab on this time and you schedule your visit on this time, I have to take the whole day off of work. Whereas if I could come the day before to do the lab, and then, it's practical things like, actually optimizing services for patients can make a huge difference. I mean, it's so silly, right? it's, for some people it's the parking cost. So they're like, just keep me there all day. I only want to pay one parking cost. And for other people, it's time off of work. But that's different for each person. And you really need to know that. Some of the research that I've done has just been about, practical things like parking, like copays for medications, like the benefits of cost conversations, what actually happened when people had conversations about their costs. Was it suddenly like, oh, well, no chemo for you? Or was it more like, hey, we can get you plugged into this financial assistance program that could potentially help make things more affordable for you? And again, I always say we're not trying to take people's costs from $20,000 to zero. We're trying to help in meaningful ways, but we also realize that, for many people, like they just see the huge black cloud that is unaffordability within healthcare, and they just say, I can't. It seems too dense. I can't find a solution out of it. But I do think that even just anticipating need, knowing that certain medications are expensive, realizing that care delivery could be more efficient, making sure that we're all working together as a team so that I don't have a visit and then the next day they have a different visit and then the next day they have a different visit. Like, hey, if possible, can you either spread out the visits or make them all on the same day? These things are all kind of practical things, and I honestly feel like very achievable. And it has nothing to do with drug pricing. It has nothing to do with how healthcare is, delivered in the United States. It has everything to do with how healthcare is delivered to the individual, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always those small steps that can lead to bigger, better outcomes, I guess, taking those small steps. So that's good advice. Can you tell us a little bit more about shared decision-making and how you've employed that technique in your own work?
Sure. The idea of shared decision-making is really kind of new. And it's this like groundbreaking, like shocking concept that patients should maybe be involved in their healthcare decisions.
Wow. That's a headline.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's so shared decision making is what I try to highlight for trainees about how this is new. The fact that it's new is sort of depressing, and the other one is patient reported outcomes, which is essentially just asking patients how they feel and what their symptoms are, as opposed to a physician saying these are what your symptoms are. And patient reported outcomes and shared decision making are both new concepts, and they're both being explored now. But again, the fundamental idea that the provider and the patient should make a decision together, and the fundamental concept that providers and patients should both know what their symptoms are is shockingly new. This idea of shared decision making, though, really is just that, we make decisions based on our values, based on the treatment efficacy, meaning how well it works. And then we come together. So you have the knowledge as the provider about what this drug can do, benefits, but also side effects. And as the patient, I have the, what I'm willing to put up with, what my supports are, and, what my fears are, and then we pick the best path together. And sometimes that doesn't mean the most aggressive care, and sometimes it does. Sometimes it means flying across the country to participate in a clinical trial that has a 1% chance of a benefit, because that's what's important to patients. So I always say shared decision-making is not trying to make care cheaper per se. As it turns out, it's just making it more patient-centered. And to be honest, that usually does improve value, because a lot of the treatments that we're delivering to patients are just making people sicker. They're not necessarily making people more well, and they're not even necessarily giving people more time. Some of them are actually taking time away from people.
Can I ask a little personal question?
Sure.
How does your advocacy and your work help heal from your loss?
This is a moment of silence. Sorry, it was me nodding my head.
Yeah. No, I understand this is because I've had to deal with this myself, but I just love everything that you've been saying, but I want to focus on you and and the work that you're doing and the transition that you've made from your career to, and it just, if I could just put advocate right across the screen here, I mean, that's just one of the, in big bold letters, that's just one of the things that I would say about you. But I'd like to know, how does that help heal? Because loss, I mean, it's hard.
I think initially I think maybe the word I'd look for is like a big open wound or like a raw nerve. It was so immediate in that healing process of at least getting like a, granulation tissue at the bottom of the wound, or, having the nerve deaden a little bit just so you can actually so that a puff of wind doesn't irritate it and make it inflamed. That's a huge step. For me now, as a cancer doctor, as a researcher, as someone who's trying to promote a mission, I think all of this, I try not to have myself defined as being a cancer widow, although certainly and above all, that's why I'm here. But I'm able to pull all of these extra little bits to make, to cover up the wound a little bit, to fill it in, because I can say, well, I have done research and I have taught people, I've mentored, trainees. I do, take care of patients. I do, help deliver plans that ultimately, cure their cancer or palliate their pain. And it helps create a more full sense of self other than just essentially being, just this raw nerve. I'm building up the tissue around it so that I can be a functional person again. But I think maybe, as you probably both know, it's, grief is a fickle thing, and it can be one thing, a song or an image or a memory that can take you right back there where you feel like you're still that. I mean, it's all nesting layers, right? But that it can expose that raw nerve again. So, and I think that's probably good, right? Because if I ever got so deadened that I didn't feel that, that would probably be a poor reflection on the reason why I'm here. It always is rooted in selfishness, to be honest, in terms of, what we experience, but also kind of in that mission of trying to improve the patient experience. So knowing how bad it can get makes me work that much harder to try to make it better, even in small ways.
Beautifully said.
I was thinking about, I was watching a TV show recently, and one of the characters, her mother had died from cancer a couple years ago in the premise of the story. And then the dad comes to visit her, and even stuff like that, like as simple as that, like, it's not that there was anything about that dad character in that episode that like resonated other than he was a caring father. But like I can totally, again, we can all relate when it comes to loss and how grief manifests itself throughout your life. Here I am 11 years later, and I see that dad figure and I'm like, oh, my dad's dead. Sucks that I can't talk to him anymore like that. And then you're just right back there. But I'd rather live with that, and knowing that I was so deeply loved, than not to have not had that. So
I know it seems like it's cliche to say, I'd rather have loved and lost than to have never loved at all, but it's true. It makes me the person that I am today, and the experiences that we went through have really taught me miles. Don't get me wrong. I would pay $1 million right now to just go back and change time. Like I would much rather be a dumber, less motivated, less influential person, to have the life that I was supposed to have, which was, a wife and a mother and a non-profit art director. And, and that was, I would much rather have that, but that's not an option. So I got to do what I can do now to try to fulfill. Again, like, we're a team, so I'm hustling overtime for the team, and it's it's a powerful motivator to think that you want to live up to someone, to the to the ideal of what of what your plans could have manifest as, essentially. For me, even that reflects in, where I decided to go to medical school, or, taking this job here at Memorial Sloan Kettering. It is in part from what I feel like would have mattered to Andrew. And I know that seems like cliche, but like Memorial Sloan Kettering is like, it's a really good center. So I didn't make sacrifices to come here. But, it's hard to live in New York City. I think that there are pluses and minuses to any kind of path. But I do really try to honor, what I'm supposed to be doing for that.
I so appreciated this conversation. I'm not trying to wrap things up, by the way. I think we probably have one or two more questions, but I mean, it's just so obvious how much of an impact Andrew had on your life. And so I just want to take a moment to express our gratitude for you sharing a little bit of him with us today. And of course, with that, sharing a lot of yourself as well.
Andrew always said that he was the real doctor. This was obviously before I went to medical school, but he has a PhD, and he always made fun of doctors for calling themselves doctors. He said, well, PhDs are the real doctors. They have the most training. And it is very funny. I have some friends who are MD PhDs, and I always say, well, you're doctor, because, you definitely win any arguments.
There you go.
But it is really funny that I ended up being a physician doctor, where he was a doctor of philosophy or a PhD, because it's not that he didn't respect physicians. It's just that he maybe felt like people didn't respect PhDs.
Yeah. Well, I may leave this conversation feeling more inspired than ever to become a doctor, because as you can see on my screen, my last name is Best, and I just feel like Dr. Best has a nice ring to it. It's never too late to go back to school.
I will say that I went to school in my 30s, and and I have to say I was the oldest person in my medical school class. You can go back to school in your 30s or your 40s, and to be honest, it's easier than you think it would be, because if you've lived a real life and had a career, you understand that things like tests are, you just consider it like your job. You're just like, my job is to be in school. And it really is, I'm not trying to underplay my efforts to be a physician, but it's honestly not that hard.
I start next week at the University of Barcelona.
Amazing.
It is. Medicare and University of Barcelona all in the same month. That's
things are just lining up for you, Chris.
I tell you,
things are looking up.
Yes, I have the best co-host.
Oh, well, I mean, I appreciate that credit, and I will take it. So thank you.
What a delightful conversation. See, I told you it was just going to be a conversation.
Yeah. I had a feeling. Yeah. Well, I think as we round out our conversation, I know one thing we wanted to ask about is, you're very prolific on social media, particularly on Twitter. So tell us a little bit about how, when you decided, I guess, to use social media as an advocacy tool or as a tool to connect with people in the space.
It's so funny. I'm giving a talk next week about social media as an advocacy tool for financial toxicity. So I feel like this directly leads into that.
Right on the nose.
So I'm really trying to frame my narrative around this concept already for today. And I really just kind of, I'll be honest, lucked into social media. The primary platform that I use is Twitter. But I have found that it's just a really nice community, and it's a community of providers, researchers, clinicians, and patients, and family members as well. And it's it's kind of a free-for-all, as you may know. So that's a blessing and a curse sometimes. But I've really enjoyed the capacity that, it has to kind of pull in all sorts of different people from different walks of life, to have people weigh in on, for example, your research, to promote your research, to promote advocacy efforts, and to really just hear other people's stories and narratives. So I feel like, I was told by my mentor at the time, Dr. Yusuf Zafar, that I should get on Twitter. He was very active at that time. Although, interestingly enough, I think I'm more active than he is now. And it was to promote the very first kind of research article that came out about financial toxicity. And I sort of realized immediately how much power it could have in terms of actually moving the message forward. And so I always say with advocacy efforts, you need to have a personal story. You need to have anecdote, because that's what makes things real, tangible. But you also need to have the data, and you need to have both to make a convincing argument. And I think what Twitter allows is for you to marry both, for you to talk about maybe your personal experiences, but also to back it up with data, because you can link to articles, you can link to stories, you can actually, promote information or combat misinformation all at the same time. And it really allows you to really nicely keep tabs on what's going on in the real world. I think the real problem with academia and for people who practice in ivory tower, academic medical centers, is that we can sometimes be disengaged from how cancer care is delivered in the community. We can be disengaged with how patients, maybe struggle because, our patients maybe are a little bit more charmed by being able to, in fact, just come into the door at our world leading cancer center. And so it really helps, root me in sort of what's going on the ground. Now, what's going on the ground, because it's sometimes very, very dirty. So that's the other thing, is that you end up sometimes having to dodge trolls and other sort of negative people on Twitter. But I still think that the good voices, the positive voices, still outweigh the negative voices. But I certainly have gotten the occasional nasty message or a nasty directed, response. And I think, again, taking the good with the bad, I think it's a really powerful tool, but it is not for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, people are so brave on Twitter when they're using a bot.
I was going to say I have several anonymous accounts that have called me out for one reason or another. I think, for being at a large academic medical center, we are sort of an easy target. I think like anything, there's no perfect job. There's no perfect employer. And I always, you take the good with the bad with anything. But I feel like the community that's built online, specifically within oncology, has been really lovely. I've gotten actually many opportunities from Twitter, interestingly enough. And so I really do encourage it for both patients and for providers and for caregivers. There's a lot of support to me made for everyone. I think for specifically within cancer, for people with, for example, metastatic disease, I feel like it can be very, very isolating. And there's a huge metaviver population on Twitter, to the extent where they actually created their own word, metaviver. And it's a really lovely concept that, it's somewhere in between the idea of a metastatic cancer diagnosis and being a survivor, which is you never really get off treatment, but you're not dead yet. And you can still advocate strongly for yourself and for other metavivers. And that community has been incredible in terms of actually making sure that research dollars are driven towards people with metastatic disease, making sure that their voice is at the table, because so much of what we talk about in cancer care is a cure. But, does that mean that we just ignore people who can't be cured?
Speaking of Twitter, how can people find you on your social media?
I'm at Fumiko Chino, which is just my first name and my last name. And I'm very active on Twitter. I do have an Instagram account, but that's mostly just pictures of my cat. So if you're a cat lover, you can certainly go over there and see lots of pictures of Franklin, who has provided a lot of comfort for me over the last decade. He was one of the last gifts that my husband gave me.
Special, very special.
Special cat.
He forced me to adopt a cat. And it's been a real gift for me to have him this whole time. And so it's mostly Franklin on Instagram. But on Twitter, I do have a semi-professional account, I swear.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually am reminded when you mentioned your Instagram, I think I based my Instagram bio off of yours. Like I came across your account sometime in the last 2 years and I was like, oh, that's perfect. Mostly a personal account and photos of my cat.
It's funny how I can track my journey through medical school and residency and the different places that I lived based on pictures of Franklin. And the experiences of having studied for my boards, or from having come back at 4 a.m. from the hospital, or from having lost a patient and really, been really crushed. And I have this picture of like Franklin, I think it outlined in sunlight. And, I know what happened, before I took that picture. And so I can trace all of that. And that's one of the amazing things, the amazing gifts that animals give you, is that they're really, they're a through line for your own narrative.
Yep.
And they're such a wonderful support. Although I guess I will derail the conversation if I talk too much about my cat.
No, I mean, honestly, let's just go off onto our own little podcast. You and me will talk about our cats.
There we go.
I think everyone will sign up for that podcast.
I won't lie. I feel like people are very isolated, especially during the pandemic. I've really encouraged people that if they were considering getting an animal, to really think about it, because it provides so much structure to people's life.
It does.
And it's not dangerous to them. I mean, for the most part. And it can really provide a lot of comfort, and support, which is honestly what someone with cancer, and especially in an isolating world like in the pandemic, what they really need.
Mm-hmm. I had just photographed my cat on sitting on my lap while I was working earlier today. I mean, it's just, you can't beat that feeling of their little tiny little warmth on your lap, and that they just chose you, it's just, It's the best.
Yeah, no, I feel very blessed. I'm living in New York City. I have this beautiful apartment. I have a good job. I have, a fuzzy cat, for everything that I've kind of struggled through to get here, the many times where I felt like I wasn't going to make it. I mean, frankly, literally just wasn't, I wasn't emotionally, intellectually, physically capable of moving forward. I've still managed to do that. And I feel like this life that I've kind of built from the ashes has it's not bad.
I was wondering, this is more of a deep cut, I guess, knowing your background. I think I first saw your name when it was attached to that illustrated series that Nathan Gray did, based on your story. So can you tell us a little bit more about that experience and getting to tell your story in that way, particularly with your art background?
Yeah, it's interesting. I never really thought about the poetry of words before, and this concept of narrative medicine has really been evolving over the last, I would say, decade to 2 decades. And we start thinking about how, again, it's data and anecdote. And so even just the delivery of medicine and how you care for individuals who are critically ill can really be maybe illustrated with both a picture and a story and a through line. And Nathan Gray, Dr. Gray is such an incredible illustrator. He has really built a career on palliative care, or the delivery of care to the critically ill, but also in creative storytelling and how to express something very complex in a series of pictures and maybe even very limited words. So it was such an honor to actually get to work with him to develop both images and the correct words to kind of tell my story. And we've collaborated on 2 different op-eds specifically about what has happened in my life and kind of the messages that I've tried to take away from it. One of them about financial toxicity and debt collectors, and the other one specifically about my cat and about how he saved my life. So it's been fun. I think realizing the power of a picture, tells, is worth 1,000 words. The marrying of both is really, I know this as a photography major. Again, I always kind of realize that composition and an image can really be quite powerful. So I feel very blessed to have worked with him. I realize that didn't quite answer your question, but anyway.
Oh, no, that's all right. I know his work really resonates. And as I said, it's more of a deep cut because I worked for Enwell. I did Enwell social media for 3 years. And so, I'm just like absorbing all of that content. And that one stuck out to me, or a lot of his work that he's done, all his illustrations as it relates to caregiving, palliative care, and all of that.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing how we're finally realizing that physicians are also people.
Turns out.
We're allowed to have interests and fears and hopes and dreams and talents, and like the idea of a creative story by a physician, or a novel way of relaying information is sort of developing. I know that, for example, Grace Ferris is an illustrator who does a lot of really great kind of quirky, funny comics about her work as, I believe, a hospitalist. But it's both the story of being a physician and also just the story of being human that kind of can sometimes really help. And I think the first graphic novel by a resident physician. She's a Black female resident. That's actually coming out soon. I'm really looking forward to that. I think it's going to be very exciting.
Yeah, Mike Natter comes to mind as well. Yeah, he's funny.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Not to get too derailed, but there was this fundraising campaign that I just saw that was specifically the idea of doing knitter style illustrations, but of in different skin tones. So, for example, I've never seen an anatomical picture of someone with Black skin. It's always a white person who, if you're going to show like an arm or whatever, it's always a white person. But the idea of a pregnant woman who is Black, and in a medical illustration.
Yeah, I saw that making the rounds too.
It's so stunning. Important. It's just, again, it's just like a flip that switches that you're like, oh yeah, that's something that we're missing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
In terms of equity.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, actually. Well, Chris, welcome back.
Yeah, well, sometimes you just got to take a break.
Sometimes you do. Yeah,
but one of the so many fascinating things about what you guys were just talking about. I was kind of like eavesdropping, and the whole concept of social media and stories, because I've said this zillions of times, but it's our stories that really bind us together. And when we share our stories, we find out that, we're really not that much different. Cultural differences, sure, but it all comes back down to that corny love, care, and commitment. That's all we really want to do when we're entrusted with somebody else's care. And it's through story sharing where diversity meets the road to collaborate on a common cause. And you are certainly living it, Dr. Chino.
Sometimes I really struggle when I'm talking to patients and families to not involve myself, because in some ways, when you share your own story, it's a way of bonding. And in other ways, it can actually just shift it slightly more towards you. And my focus is always on the patient and the family and the best communication for them. And it's really interesting. Sometimes I feel like it is appropriate for me to share my story, and other times it's not, because it would make it too much about me. And that is a very fine line. And that negotiation, I feel like, shifts mercurially. Yeah, and it's can be a challenge for me, because again, I never want to make it about me. It's what motivates me, but my story, can sometimes, be a distraction to the conversation that I'm having. So that's always a challenge for me. And I continually to try to figure out when is it appropriate for me to talk to someone to say, I know a little bit about what you're going through. And when should I hold back?
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the value of social media and having your stories out there, because most savvy patients, they're doing a little research on who they're going to see, and they're going to see this unbelievable story about you and your husband and what you've done, and they're going to connect on a human aspect with you. They would know that going in, because there's the doctor side, which is very important, but then there's the humanistic side. And sometimes, I know, at least in my era, we always thought the priest, the doctor, all those folks that had the authority, I say that with quotations, authority label with them, were always all knowing and all seeing. And we never saw the human side of it. Social media has allowed to create that human side, which immediately gives some comfort. I would readily sign up for an appointment with you without without any hesitation.
I hope I never have to see you.
I was going to say, hopefully not.
Well, you have to come to Spain, but that's okay. But no, that's what I think. That's as we move on in our advocacy and our work, things change with the times, and that's why, again, it comes back down to the stories and sharing them and feeling comfortable.
I think there's this real movement in medicine to make everything more humanistic, for humanism in medicine. And some of that is sharing stories, and some of it is actually just allowing physicians to, for example, cry with patients. And, the old way of teaching medicine is that you have to create this artificial barrier. And, if you get too personally involved with patients, that's a real deficit in their care. But I know my sister is also a physician, but she says, I hope I never stop crying with patients, because again, that's the measure of my humanity, recognizing their humanity. And there are certainly patients who, I don't want to be a blubbering mess in front of someone, but I do feel like if there's been good news or bad news, and if there is great emotions, to allow yourself to be human is so incredibly powerful.
Yeah, you're not just this indifferent third party in the room. Like, you're there with them, caring about their story and their journey. So,
and just being able to understand personally the impact of what a diagnosis is and how to deliver that message would mean the world to the receiver.
Yeah. Well, on that note, is there anything that we missed from this conversation that you'd like to talk about?
I always try to wrap up to think about what the next steps are. What are the things that I can sort of impart as a parting gift for kind of listening to me. And for individuals, I always try to encourage people to really think about their own lives and what their values are, and to really challenge people to talk to themselves and to talk to their family members about what their true values are, what kind of they're willing to put up with, what you're not willing to put up with, and to really think about what future could look like in the best of health and in the worst of health. And I feel like that's such a valuable conversation to have, and is so rarely had outside of the context of being in an ICU, making a decision about going onto a ventilator. But if you have some conversations with your loved ones, your family members now, it makes it a lot easier for people in the future. And that's kind of a bummer to end on. I'm sorry. Also adopt, don't shop.
There it is. Well, Fumiko, thank you so much for joining us today. This was just delightful. We didn't even get to talk about your glasses. I mean, but you and I'll have our cats and glasses podcast. That's cats, glasses, and we can do glasses like glasses and also glasses. I'm just saying, I'm just planting the seed. You just let me know. I'll be here if you ever want to do that. Our lifestyle podcast.
There you go. I like that. Can I be a part of that? Even if I don't have a cat?
Sure.
Any animals at all? Do you have an iguana, a fish?
Chia pet.
A parakeet? I'm usually quite good with plants, but I have managed to murder all chia pets.
I've been able to keep our orchids going after 2 years, which is surprising. So, but chia pets are my preferred pets.